Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's actually my pleasure to be here in this beautiful and also very creative and innovative space in the center of Toronto. Now, you actually gave most of my lecture, right? So, so I'm going to have to start from scratch. And I'm going to start with a little bit of my personal background and tell you that I grew up in a small town of about 20,000 people in northwest Ontario. And by some strange sequence of events, I find myself here in a position that I actually had no model for. I had no way to imagine it or dream what it would look like. So it's been an absolutely amazing journey for me. And about halfway through my lifetime, I became a neurologist. So by trade, I am a physician, and I still practice neurology, even though it's on a small scale. But I've had amazing opportunities over my life that have come about in a variety of ways. And I want to start by just telling you the story that I would say starts at the beginning of that white pathway that you see on the image here. And it occurred when I was asked to take on what turned out to be my first substantial leadership position, and it was as the head of the neuroscience program at the then Toronto Hospital. And it was actually very exciting. One of the topics on your table is about the imposter syndrome, so I remember feeling a little bit of that. But I had the experience of walking between the Toronto General and the Toronto Western Hospital after that discussion. And you go through Kensington, on Baldwin Street, and I'm walking along in a very, very positive, happy mood. And I'm very within myself and focused, and someone from across the street hollers out at me in a very, very loud voice with a pretty significant Caribbean accent. It says, "Girl, you are walking with potential." And I'm glad you laughed. I've had some people say, "Weren't you offended?" And I said, "My God, no." For the first time in my life, I thought that somehow I was projecting something that I perhaps in a little bit of a way knew was within myself, but didn't know how to put it out. And I realized that I had this big opportunity, and that I had to use all of my resources and bring everything that I had to bear to enact that potential and to try to spread it more broadly. So what I want to do this morning is, I'm going to cram 3 courses into one, Leadership 101, 201, and 301, the basics, some more specific advanced lessons learned, and then I want to talk about riddles as the advanced course. And I want to do it with a series of images that to me are meaningful and beautiful rather than a lot of words, although you will see some words that also has some beauty and meaning for me. And this particular image is in one of our new buildings, our intergenerational wellness building. It's a mosaic. It's from a painting rendered by one of the artists in one of our programs called Workman Arts. And it was executed with the direction of the artist and a team of mosaic experts by patients, by staff, and by volunteers. And it's absolutely stunning, and it's meant, to me, it's a symbol of the exact opposite of our old wall that I'll come back to a little bit later. It has color, it has images in it, it has a horizon, a sky, earth, and it has a pathway through it. Even though it's meandering, it's got a beginning, middle, and an end, and an amazing point to it. Everybody know Jan Arden? This is one of my favorite pieces from a song. And what I want to do, the reason that I put this here is to let you know that, to bring a little humility to the conversation here and let everybody in this room know that I completely understand that I am where I am on the shoulders of others, and actually on the shoulders of mostly women. And I include my mother in this, and I think that the last line of this is so meaningful. And if you take away any message, it's find a way to have your feet on the ground, your heart there, your heart in your hand, and to look forward, move forward. Now, I just told you that I'm a farm girl. I'm a small town girl. Make good in the big city. And the fact is, if that's all I brought to the table, it would be absolutely uninteresting for you to hear about me. The only thing I brought from my childhood was a great deal of gentleness, kind of understanding of the phases of the moon, knowledge that the world turns and sometimes things aren't in your power to change. We have a bunch of farm stories in my family, and one is that one year everything was so good, we had so many watermelons that we just ate the centers out and threw the rest away to pigs. And another year things look good, and on September 1st the rain comes and it stays and stays and stays, and you can't get the corn out of the field. Those are things that are out of your control, and you have to roll with them. I also brought from my life my high school boyfriend, who's still my husband, and all of those things. That's all there was. But add to that, this image is meant to represent the pieces of an individual life. It's one of the Chagall windows that are in a hospital in Tel Aviv, and they represent the sons of Jacob. And I like to think of the yellow, sort of whitish yellow golden parts as my childhood, but layer on that maybe the green of my education, blue of my experience, my friendships and my interactions. But most of all, the real reason I'm here is because I have a position, and I capture attention because of that position. And I think it's a little bit of a tragedy, and one of the things that I think we should be mindful of is how we get the voices out of the people who have a lot of experience, have a lot to give, but they don't have a position that attracts attention. I actually had a very big position prior to this one, but I wouldn't have been invited to this particular event unless I had the positional power. So one of the important lessons for me, and it'll come out again when I talk about communications, is how important it is to bring every bit of your world to your leadership activities and also to your personal interactions. So first of all, the basics. I'm gonna tell you what I think are the most important components or characteristics of leadership. But I'll start by telling you another story. This happened years and years ago. I was at a fundraiser, sitting at a table of pretty significant individuals, and I happened to be sitting next to a retired University of Toronto professor. And the conversation was around search committees, and he went on to say how he had been on hundreds of search committees, and they always start with the language of what are the characteristics we want in a leader. And he brushed that off as idiotic. He says, because there's only two characteristics that are important for a leader, and they are robust good health and thick skin. And I want to affirm that those are actually a sine qua non if you want to have a significant leadership position. But I think that there's another constellation of characteristics that it's important to bring to the table. Besides leading from having a vision and leading from a base of your core values, I think it's important to know yourself, to be creative and open to new ideas, and to be a good communicator. And the self-knowledge part, I like to use the metaphor of the brain, because remember, I'm a neurologist, and it's hard for me to separate that bit of knowledge from my everyday activities now. And I separate the idea of self-knowledge into two components. One is the idea of self-awareness, knowing who you are and what you're made of, but also the connection between that knowledge and your ability to control yourself. And the neurologic metaphor that I give is about the brain is all about connectivity. It's all about connecting what comes in, what strikes you from the environment, how you make the intuitive and the physiological leap to your actions, and how important it is to not ignore the sensory aspects, the listening part of the communication equation. And in a neurologic sense, there are a number of important things you have to do to be able to walk. It's not just about your muscles. It's about your balance, your inner ear. It's about knowing where your body is in space with your eyes closed. and it's about your vision. It's about your ability to see your environment and bring all of those things to bear on the way you communicate with your world. Now, we had a conversation this morning about Porter. So let's talk about creativity, and I think that there are two important components to it, and it's the first one is perspective, and the second is wonderment. This is a picture taken by one of my colleagues who was on a flight from Ottawa to Toronto, and as you might imagine, the flight didn't land. When I first saw this picture, I actually thought it was some sort of a construct, that it was fake, and it was meant to portray a tidal wave coming over Toronto. So my first instinct was to think of Toronto being engulfed. But I actually flew in about 4 or 5 hours later, and it was gone, right? The clouds and the fog were gone. So it struck me that this, in fact, was a picture of Toronto emerging. And it just served to me as a really wonderful metaphor of the importance of imagining that things aren't necessarily as you first see them. Coming out of medical school, I don't know if there are any physicians in the room, but you know, there's a tendency to believe that your perspective is the only one, the correct one, and it's been such a learning journey for me to understand that there are so many perspectives in life, and some of them are paradoxical, but they all have value, and they all need to be appreciated and integrated into your thinking, so you can be truly creative. Does anybody recognize what these things are? So I first saw them in Rome maybe 10 years ago, and I thought it was a fire. But these are starlings, and the actual, a flock of starlings, like a flock of geese or a pride of lions, is referred to as a murmuration. Is that the most beautiful word? A murmuration of starlings. And I was galvanized by them. I couldn't take my eyes off of them. And it made me go back and understand the mathematics and the physics of these flocks. They fly around in these incredible formations. They do not crash into each other, and you don't see one individual starling flying off on its own. They exhibit a type of top-down causation in mathematical terms that again, to me, is an example of the wondrous things that you can learn if you keep your eyes open and follow up on them. And all of those things bring you to a place where you can look at the world in a different way and come up with solutions to problems that you wouldn't have if you closed yourself down. That childlike sense of wonderment is really important to me. Everybody's familiar with the aphorism that time flies when you're having fun. Think back to when you were a child, how long it took to get from summer to summer or Christmas to Christmas, and it's like that now. And it's just the opposite. Time flies when you're not putting new things in your brain, when you're not having new experiences or incorporating them into your wholeness. So I can't stress enough that idea of continuing to learn and continuing to understand the wondrous nature of the world. So I have three images that I want to show you that are about communications, and I mean them to illustrate the idea that communications are important on a person-to-person basis, but they also have to take into account a couple of other things. This is an image of my cycling group. I am the slowest in the group, except for the guy on your far left, who's a surgeon at Toronto General Hospital, Lauren Rothstein, and a couple of things. This goes back to the starlings. There has to be a fair amount of communication when you're cycling close together, and caring for each other. And this group happens to be almost entirely a group of healthcare workers. So at the same time as we're cycling and exercising, we have the opportunity to learn from each other again, and communicate our hopes and our dreams and our aspirations. And when we first started, we actually had a lot of accidents. We had broken wrist, we had shoulder dislocation, but we hardly have any more. We're very good at that interpersonal communication. This is meant to symbolize, this image is a symbol of how important it is to bring aspects of culture community interactions into your conversations. This was given to me by one of my colleagues who's from New Zealand, and in the Maori culture, it's called a wakatuko. Is anybody from New Zealand here and familiar with this? So these are 3 baskets, and the saying under them, "Naku te roro, nau te roro ka ora ai te iwi." What it means is, with your basket and with my basket, the people will live. And the baskets are not only filled with food, they're filled with knowledge. They're filled with knowledge of good and evil, healing, memories, etc. And particularly, it's one of the little bits of conversation we've had as we've walked around here, how important it is, especially in a city like Toronto, to understand this is again about perspective, the need to communicate on more than a personal level. It has to go deeper than that, and it even has to go deeper than than having the cultural wherewithal to speak with power. It has to go to a spiritual level. This is an image from an art installation about 10 years ago. Somebody's nodding their head as if they've seen it before, in Massachusetts. And it was installed in an asylum, in a mental health facility that had been in existence for about 100 years. It was being demolished, it was being moved, and the administration of the hospital felt that there was a need to pay tribute to the organization and to the and to the people who worked there, and to the patients who received care there. And the artist that was commissioned filled the place with something like 48,000 pots of flowers. They were in the hallways, in the rooms, in a swimming pool. The basement had grass in it, and there was a lot of conversation about this. It's called Bloom, if you want to look it up. It's quite stunning, and the very basic idea is this is to pay homage to the spirits that inhabited this place, particularly those who never received flowers. So to take into account not only the person to person, but the culture and the spiritual aspects of communication is so important to me personally, and I think it's one of the key success factors that I would say are responsible for what I do. So the second set of lessons is about growing leadership, and it's about what some of the leadership lessons are, not the characteristics, but the lessons learned. And I have to tell you, I do believe in magic, and I have many stories that I could tell you about who carried me along the way in my trajectory. But I still look at it with surprise sometimes, going back to what I said at the beginning, having no understanding of what a life in the big city looked like, what life in a leadership role looked like. And I have a lot of people to thank for that, for the fact that I have been given, through a series of fortunate events, the chance to do good. And that quote is from Walt Whitman, who most of you would know as possibly the greatest of American poets, but you may not know that he worked as an aide, a nurse's aide, during the Civil War in the Army hospitals, and he kept a diary. And in one passage, he talks about the horror of the battle and the work that he had to do, but he says at the end, thank goodness I had the chance to do good today. And the image that you see here is the building that first occupied the site at 999 Queen Street, the asylum. It was referred to as the Ontario Lunatic Asylum for many years, even up until the 40s and 50s. It's gone now, but I think it's a symbol of where the world of mental health has come from. The idea that it was on farmland when it was constructed in Toronto. It's now in really smack dab in the center of perhaps the liveliest, most interesting area of the city right now. And it was state of the art when it was built. It very quickly became overcrowded and imbued with pain, anger, sadness, horror, and sadly it's gone. If you come to CAMH, you do have one of the artifacts from it. It's a spiral staircase that goes up into the little tower on the top. but it's something that I often come back to as an image of where the world of mental health was 150 years ago and where we are now. So the details of leadership. I'm going to give you 4 very quick lessons from my mentors, and they are the statesmanship lesson, generosity, bias to action, and the mentorship lesson. And I'm going to start with this image. Again, a conversation that we had here. The lessons came from these 4 people, and we'll talk later about what's wrong with that picture. On the upper left is Mark Rochon, who some of you may know, and he actually didn't give me my first job. In fact, he rejected me as a individual who is worthy of a position, but for the best possible reason. In the interview, he gave me a really good chance. He asked me, this was for a chief of staff job at a community hospital. And he asked me if, as the chief of staff, if the administration had made a decision and the doctors didn't agree with it, what would I do? And what I told him was that I would try to change his mind. And he said, you don't understand. The decision has been made. What would you do? I said, I'd try to change your mind. I couldn't get off the fact that he was giving me the opportunity to talk about the difference between leadership and advocacy. The opportunity to again, lift yourself up, not be an advocate for your particular group, but to look for the good of the whole and to speak as a leader as opposed to an advocate, to be a statesperson, to be a statesman and not a parochial viewer of the situation. The second image is Arnie Aberman, who I knew as one of my physician-in-chiefs and also as the dean of the medical school. And for a long time, he would, when I would come storming into his office with some complaint or another, he would, it would usually be because I thought somebody wasn't paying attention to me. He would say, there's no end to the good you can do if you let other people take credit for your good ideas. Okay, so I learned a little bit from that to be generous. Many years later, I saw that this was actually a quote from Harry S. Truman, former U.S. president, and I've had to go back and explain to Arnie that I'm sure that Harry S. for nothing Truman was very, very happy that he was able to do so much good by that phrase and not having been given credit for it. The third picture is Dr. Charles Tatter. He's a neurosurgeon. And when I got that first role as the head of the neuroscience program, I was his successor. And his first words to me were, Catherine, whatever you do, don't let them get you caught up in that strategic planning stuff. There's a whole lot to say around that, and I actually do believe in planning strategically. It brings a lot of a lot of credibility, a lot of authenticity to the final product. But what he was really saying, he said, don't sit around and plan, do things. And that has been one of the most exciting challenges in my new position, having previously been at an organization where there was definitely a bias to action. In the world of mental health, there's a bias to inaction. And it's a very great opportunity that we have to move forward with a lot of excitement. And the last one was also a physician-in-chief of mine, Dr. Michael Baker, who actually, when he gave me my first position, this is how insecure and how much of an imposter syndrome I had, and he told me what the financial arrangements were. Hold your breath. I actually said, don't you think that's too much? I actually said that. So he explained to me what the rules were and why I was getting what I was getting. And he also turned out to be very open to examining some systemic biases in the department against women, and has been, amongst others, very helpful in understanding how to mentor and how to pay attention to people at different stages in their career. When I was much earlier in my leadership positions, I thought, if I speak in Jungian archetypes, about the warrior, the wanderer, the explorer, the magician, for many years I thought that the warrior was the most powerful and sophisticated of the archetypes. And you mentor people who are warriors, and they have to be They have to be supported in developing a peaceful path. But I subsequently find out that that's one of the more primitive of the archetypes, the warrior. The explorer or the wanderer needs to be helped to distinguish themselves, and what you really strive for as a mentor is to be a magician, to be someone who can create something from nothing, who can really lift themselves up, be generous, and really enact the role of a mentor. And I'll just take a minute to tell you what I think is a common mistake, is mistaking role models for mentors. Role models are really, really important. Somebody that you see is doing something good or being something that you want to be or you want to be like, all well and good. A mentor has presence. A mentor has the ability to open doors for you, to give you gifts, to recommend you to someone, and you, as you become more, I don't know, experienced, or I want to say older, but as you go on in your career, the fact is that you want to have mentors who are able to help you along the way. And of course, what's obviously wrong with this picture is I had no women mentors. I had no women. I had a lot of role models, but I had no mentors. And what happened in that situation was that me and my colleagues turned to each other, and we engaged in mutual mentorship. And I think that it carried us a long way, but it is a lesson to all in the room here that it's one of the places where we really still have to do a lot of work, is to become the type of people that actually have enough stature, sophistication, enough personal and professional power to own the gifts that we give out to our mentees. And the upshot of those 4 lessons are that I find myself in this wonderful position to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about CAMH, and to tell you that we've gone from that asylum mentality to having developed a really exciting trajectory that has a strong commitment to transformation. We talk about transforming lives, about transforming the way society thinks about mental illness, but also the transformation that's taken place in the physicality of the West Queen West campus. It is it's been a really powerful symbol of what I've been able to do over the past 3 years, and the words that you have here are the core values that we represent, the values of the organization that we have on all of our public information. And the opportunity that we had was to do 2 things. One is that idea of changing the way we think about, the way society thinks about mental illness by attacking prejudice and creating a movement. Some of you may have read a book called The Emperor of All Maladies. It's subtitled A Biography of Cancer. And in it, the author talks about the trajectory of appreciation of cancer, going from something that was also hidden and spoken of quietly to being an important movement to raise money, to do research, etc. And he talks about the fact that you need 4 things to create a movement. 1, you need a prophecy. 2, you need a prophet, you need a prophecy, you need a holy book, and a sign from God. And he says them a little bit different. I've embellished them. But this is Siddhartha Mukherjee. And in the world of cancer, the prophet was Sidney Farber, who was successful in creating sustained remissions in children with leukemia. And that was, in a leap of logic, was translated into we can cure cancer as the prophecy. There were publications around the time that talked about how cancer could be cured, and he refers to the sign as the moon landing. And some of you in the room will remember that the tagline of that campaign to raise money for research in cancer was, if we can put a man on the moon, we can cure cancer. So what we're trying to do in the world of mental illness is the same thing. This is not this is not a series of illnesses or a constellation of problems that have no hope. There is as much evidence on how to treat someone with an acute psychosis or depression as there is diabetes and heart failure. We have a harder time translating evidence into practice, but those are the things that we have to move forward on and continue on that trajectory of creating a movement. And the way that I believe that we'll do it is by delivering excellent patient care on two bookends. One of the bookends is brain science, and the other is city building. We know things. We know about the genetic and epigenetic components of mental illness. We know about the chemical nature of neural transmission. We know now that the brain can change itself. When I was in medical school, we learned that in your 20s, after your 20s, your brain was immutable. We now know it can grow cells. There are stem cells, and certainly the connectivity of the brain changes under good environmental circumstances and under bad. It changes to the good with the appropriate treatment. It changes to the bad under the influence of a number of environmental characteristics. And the second bookend, of course, is the city building component. This is a map that I have in my office, and it illustrates it's from 1878. No, I'm sorry, it's from 1910. I have another one from 1878 when it was still farmland. And what you see here is the old building that has the title on it in all of the city archives of the Provincial Lunatic Asylum. And it already has the neighborhoods. So I think it's very interesting when we talk about the fact that we had to open ourselves up to the neighborhood, and you see here that obviously there was some, at that time, a visible barrier, the big wall, and subsequently an ideological barrier. But now this street, Fennings, is White Squirrel Way. We have Ossington cutting into the campus, and Workman Way, and a street that goes crossway called Stokes Street, named after one of the early professors of psychiatry at the University of Toronto. And I've been telling a few people lately, one of the most stunning things that I've noticed on the campus is that people are walking through now, walking their dogs with coffee in their hand, early in the morning and late in the evening. People are moving about. It seems to be part of the neighborhood. People are dying to use our cheap parking, and it's quite an exciting thing to do. We have a lot of work in the offing, but it's as I said, it's possibly the most exciting and rewarding job that I've ever had in my life. So I want to move on now to again, alluding to the fact of no women mentors, and I was amused and pleased to see the questions for conversation, and I can cut this part of my presentation very short because you've already been talking about it, and I think as much as we might wish it was changed, that it's true, there have been amazing advances. The truth of the matter is that some of us don't recognize what's happening to us, and there are a lot of issues to be addressed. And probably the most basic one is one that we talked about, I guess, again with the ladies at table number one here. That idea of how do you make yourself present? How do you stop the invisibility, the cloak of invisibility that seems to descend on you when you're the only woman or one of few in the room? How do you actually find your voice? And I put the old wall just as another nice picture, but it's also it also is interesting for another reason. If you come to the campus and look at it, walk along it closely, it's filled with etchings. And it is said that most of those were from either patients, sometimes some of them workmen. And it's very interesting to me to imagine how lucky I am to be a bit of a microphone, to not appropriate the voice of those people that had hidden voices, but to be able to amplify them. And I think that one of the exercises that we need to engage in is understanding how to practically amplify our voices and to be able to participate fully as citizens of our great country. So the bottom line is that in the world of leadership, I guess in the world in general, that women have a number of riddles to solve that men don't. And there's a very old piece, I don't even, you know, it's more than a decade old, that you can easily find on, you know, on the internet. And if you Google the invisible knapsack, who knows about the invisible knapsack? So the metaphor is that people in the privileged aspect of society wear an invisible knapsack. We talked this morning about how I don't like to park underground. I was talking to somebody about that. Women don't like underground parking lots. I hate going. I would drive around the block a million times before I go in an underground parking lot. I've actually had the experience of buying a car and being asked if my husband was going to co-sign. We have an empty knapsack, and I think the goal is to fill it up with those pieces of privilege that that those who aren't marginal in society have. And the list I have here is one that will be familiar to every one of you. What are the assumptions that are made about you a priori before you even come in the room? That because you are or you aren't married, you do or you don't have children, that there are assumptions about your intentionality, the credibility. How do you build credibility through experiences if you're never given the experiences? And how confusing is it to be authentic, or to be an authentic person when you can't win? The story I'll give you is you're probably all familiar in your work or in school of having something called a 360, have people evaluate you for your performance. And I, generally speaking, get pretty good evaluations. And in this particular instance, there were 2 adjacent comments about me as a leader. And the first one was, Catherine has difficulty making decisions. And the second one was, Catherine is too autocratic in her decision making. They were next to each other. What do you do with that information, right? How do you parse that? How do you go forward and make sense of what you should do? There's no lesson, there's no guidebook for that. And then the fourth one is that, and this again is part of the invisible knapsack, men, generally speaking, have a very tight linkage between their credentials, their performance, and the reward that they get. And included in rewards are promotions, our jobs. That link is much looser for women. And again, just as a statement, something that that we need to think about, and we need to understand how to speak out against that particular assumption that's made about you. And since I'm probably coming close to the end of my time, I won't give you lots of examples, but I could. And then the mentorship dilemma. First of all, I always feel sensitive talking about this because I've had good mentors. I've had people who have really helped me and have promoted me. But the dilemma would be, and I'll give you a scenario, that a mentor almost certainly has more than one mentee. They almost certainly have several. And at the end of the day, everybody in this room is smart and capable and energetic and has, you know, strength and robustness and thick skin and all the things that you need. Some will have the opportunity to get amazing positions, and some will have just good or very good positions. And a lot of it has to do with who your mentor chooses to give that last gift to. And that I can't imagine that it's anything but human nature, putting a good face on it, to ascend a person who you know more personally. So what happens when all of my mentors are men? It's not like I can go to a bar and have drinks with them with impunity. It's not like I can go visit them at their cottage. It's not like I can go on their sailboat with them, which are all examples of things that my male counterparts are able to do to develop that extra relationships. Why it's so important to understand how to get past that dilemma and to make sure that we as women, especially those of us who are senior women in leadership positions, to understand that and be generous with our mentorship capabilities. And the last thing, so in closing, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to address the issue of balance and address the issue of loneliness. Right? So the other leadership dilemma is, who do you talk to, and how do you maintain a boundary with those that report to you, who may or may not be your friends. What are the issues that you have to keep to yourself? And I'll just finish by explaining that I have these two amazing dogs. I did not do this to them. I took them to a kennel, and it was on Halloween, and they said, we have a party. Is it okay if Frank and Figo participate? And I said, sure. And I came back and I found them this picture with them in these outfits. I have a circle of friends. I do not need the people at my workplace to love me or to necessarily like me. They need to, I hope that I've earned their respect, but I do have a large circle of people that I can count on for companionship, not the least of which are my two dogs that I walk every day, and they never criticize me. And these are my guys. My two sons are grown, and they have been very, very valuable, particularly because of their fields of interest. My older son is an architect and an artist, and he challenges me to be more imaginative than I'm prone to and to take risks. And the younger one admonishes me on a regular basis to try not to be so overbearing. So I'm going to stop there with my last favorite song and explain that I think the first verse has to do with what you're born, how you're born. Are you born with the ability to hold your breath in strong arms and legs? But the second part is what people permit you to do and support you and encourage you to do, the swan dives, the jackknives, and the cannonballs. So thanks very much for your kind attention.